10 minutes now before 8 o'clock. You know, most of us think of loneliness as a private concern, but Councillor Andrea Reimer wants the city to make it their business. She plans to introduce a motion today to try to find ways to increase our connection with each other. It's in response to research from Vancouver Foundation that found 1 in 3 people say it's difficult to make friends, and 1 in 4 say they are alone more than they'd like to be. Well, to talk about what the city can do to fight loneliness, we're joined by 2 people who've thought a lot about it. Michael Green is the principal with Michael Green Architects, and Jorge Amigo is the founder of the Be My Amigo campaign, a project he created out of his own struggles to make friends, and both are here in Studio 10 this morning. Good morning and welcome.
Morning. Thank you.
Jorge, first of all to you. Is Vancouver a lonely city?
Well, I think that the research proves that it is, or shows that it is, indicates that there is a certain air of loneliness here. People feel isolated and disconnected. In my personal opinion, my experience, I felt that disconnection, and I think the data from Vancouver Foundation speaks to that as well.
When did you feel lonely?
That's a good question. Well, it's not that I felt lonely in a particular moment. It's simply that coming from Mexico and moving here 5 years ago, I experienced many moments or many weeks or months where I felt that meeting people in the city is relatively difficult, or establishing connections and feeling welcome in, social groups and making new groups of friends seemed difficult. It seems that the city, in general, I don't want to, generalize every single person, but in general, it's difficult to strike up a random conversation with a stranger in a coffee shop, in a bar, on the street. So that was my initial, reaction to the city, and having many conversations about this over the past year, it seems that there's a general feeling like that. Most people that I speak to can relate to this feeling of loneliness.
You realized you weren't alone. There's a lot of people who are of like mind here.
Yes.
Michael, do you think it's the city's job, though, to help stop loneliness?
I think the challenge is that it's everybody's job to address it. And so, on one level, this is really a very intimate and personal issue that we all can change just by making eye contact with the person walking past us on the street, or talking to our next door neighbor, something that we're clearly not doing enough of. On the other hand, there are some big systemic change kind of things that can happen due to policy. We've kind of done a very good job, for instance, in our city zoning and guidelines to really activate the ground plane, and we have more to do on that front. On the other hand, we've built a lot of big towers where literally people don't know their next door neighbor in the walking down the corridor of their tower, and that's a design issue. That's an issue that can be addressed by city policy.
Jorge, how does the design of our city contribute to the loneliness, to the social isolation, if you will?
Great question, and I'm glad Michael's here, but in my opinion, when you have a city where social spaces or public spaces allow for more interaction, where you have a public square or many public spaces that allow people to simply sit there and look at each other because the space is inherently beautiful, or it makes you want to be there and talk to each other, that contributes to that. I think that in this city, from my perspective, we have a lot of spaces that are transition spaces. So the seawall is a place where you go from A to B, but you don't remain there to talk to people. There's a lack of maybe patios with cafes and tables outside where people are just simply socializing. I think that contributes to isolation, and the towers that Michael was mentioning. That's another problem.
Yeah, Michael, Jorge brings up a great point. The great cities, the old great cities of the world, all have one thing in common: they have a city square.
That's right.
And we don't. We build our cities in North America without a city square. We don't have that central meeting place. Why?
In Vancouver, there's no question it's because of the expense of our land here, our land value, and the fact that we are such a dense community. We've really, grabbed every square inch of space. What's unfortunate is some of our best public squares, the space in front of the Vancouver Art Gallery as an example, has not been sort of really embraced by the city and sort of celebrated as much as it could. We should be building up that space and encouraging it. There are other spaces like that all through the city that we could actually invest much more in. And the other observation I'd make is that we have a tough climate, obviously. In the wintertime, it's hard to get people out into public space in the winter. And we can create covered areas that give us more space to be able to engage.
Come on, Stockholm's got a city square. Some of the Scandinavian countries have big city squares, and they have a climate relatively similar to ours.
Totally true. There's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing is kind of the attitude, right?
So what would you like to see as an architect that changed to make the city less lonely?
I'd like to see it happen on two levels. I think there's a whole lot of sort of simple public decisions that we can make to create a better forum for engagement. I'd like to see things like what I call the Pushing the Tables Together series, where all the restaurants in the city on Tuesday night pull all the tables together so that you actually talk to the people sitting next to you in a restaurant, or go out to a restaurant to engage with other people. That's not a city policy decision, but that's something that we as a community can embrace as an idea. Right?
That's a great idea.
From a policy point of view, I'd really like to see planning focus on tower design. We talk about the environmental sustainability of bringing us all close together, that we travel less and so forth. The environmental sustainability of towers is very positive. On the other hand, the social sustainability is obviously being challenged by this kind of issue of isolation. And I think part of that is we literally have encouraged outdoor balconies, but not indoor space.
But we enforce that isolation ourselves. We live in towers where you can't get from one floor to the other without a security fob, and we have not one but two locks on every door because we want to be by ourselves. We want to keep the world out. Correct. At least that's the message we're sending.
Right. We create these sort of public spaces on the ground floor that nobody actually activates. Yeah. And you just don't know your next door neighbor. Why would you spend time in your corridor in a big tower when there's no daylight, there's no space where you actually want to stand and with your groceries or with your dog and meet your next door neighbor? We haven't created those spaces because there's no incentive for developers to do so. In fact, there's a disincentive.
How about you, public spaces? What would you like to see changed?
I would like to see a bit of a relaxation of certain rules in the city that don't allow for spontaneous interactions. Let's say if a band sets up or someone brings a cello in the middle of the street and starts playing, a city bureaucrat will show up in 5 minutes and tell them that, no, you can't play music here because you don't have a permit. So if we relax that attitude a little bit, that would allow for people to have spontaneous interactions and have meaningful moments. People are not just simply going to stop in a street corner and socialize if there's nothing there that's interesting to do. And I think artists, for example, can play a big role, and a grassroots movement of artists or people in general that want to make the city more interesting can play a big role. And that cannot happen when you have very strict rules about how you can perform or do things in the streets.
How much of this is just culture that can't be changed by new buildings and public squares?
I'm sure there's a certain very strong element of culture. Socializing obviously has a lot to do with people's way of socializing and how they're born and how they're raised. However, I want to be more positive about it. I want to say, well, yes, if there's a strong cultural factor, at least if we raise awareness about this issue and the conversation is going, and it is right now, we can slowly all learn to overcome these cultural restraints or constraints and start getting out there and meeting each other and smiling to people. As Michael said, it's a personal decision that every single person takes every single day to create our city. The city is this abstract idea, but if we all own this abstract idea and say, well, we can create the city that we want to live in. We can change the attitudes of others by reciprocating with a smile. So that's what I think.
Best of luck with this.
Thank you.
It's a great idea.
Thank you.
Jorge Amigo, who is the founder of Be My Amigo campaign, and Michael Green, principal at the Michael Green Architects. So what do you think that the city should do to help people feel less lonely? Is this the city's job? If so, let us know on TalkBack. If not, let us know as well. 604-662-6690 is the TalkBack number. You can also join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter at CBC Early Edition.